For thousands of years, people have been drawn to the Holy Land. Maybe you're one of those. Find out more about that today on Zola Levitt Presents.
Brethren, my heart's desire and prayer to God for Israel is that they might be saved. For there is no difference between the Jew and the Greek, for the same Lord over all is rich unto all that call upon him. Zola Levitt presents
Thank you for joining us today on Zola Levitt Presents. I'm David Hart.
I'm Kirsten Hart.
Jeffrey Seif.
Today we'll be discussing on our brand new series, Return to Eden, about the very first Hebrew, Abram, who God called from his homeland to a brand new, unknown place.
Yes, Ur of Chaldee. He had a Kuwaiti passport, and he didn't return to Canaan. He turned toward it. God beckoned him out.
Brand new land.
Yes, and the Lord beckons us to brand new places too, doesn't he?
Still calling us.
Yes, he does. He calls. The word calling is fascinating. It's not just reserved for Bible characters. God calls people today.
And in this next segment, where are you teaching from?
The wilderness of Judea. It's a fascinating place. It looks like the end of the earth.
Let's go there right now.
Salim. Abram came from, in effect, the crossroads of civilization. I mention that because when we look at early Genesis, we see that individuals were scattered all over the face of the earth, but eventually they federate into various groups, and they cluster around places where there was water. And if you look at a topographical map, whether it's Mesopotamia, which is a Greek word meaning between the rivers, or the Nile deltas, you have civilizations that emerge. In early Genesis, there was a watered place called Eden, and they were scattered. But then from Mesopotamia, one is beckoned to make his way back to the land that was once Eden. This fellow's name was Abram, and he's known as a Hebrew. Etymologically, the word Hebrew comes from a word meaning beyond the river. He is on the other side of the Euphrates, and he is beckoned to come this way, driven by certain impulses in his breast. He wants to get back to the ancestral homeland, and he gathers what he has. He was a pastoral sort, that is, sheep, goats, livestock, and he goes on a journey back to Eden. I want to open up the text and take a look at Eden as we go on our journey to understand the story of the return to Eden. It's a long journey, hundreds and hundreds of miles over tough, uncharted real estate. To make that trek, something's got to be stimulated within your heart of hearts to do it. Much as Abraham made that journey some time back, it's interesting, Hebrews have made their way back to the ancestral homeland here. And many others too, Christians particularly, come here in the tune of millions to walk where Jesus walked. There's just something about being in what's called the Holy Land. The Bible doesn't call itself that. There is this designation that's descriptive of the land of promise, thus Promised Land. And certainly the real estate itself is holy, because inasmuch as God dwelt in Eden, so too he made his footstool and his throne to dwell in the city of Jerusalem. I want to explore Abraham in a minute and those impulses, and do that with the context of understanding that people tend, all of life tends to move. I want you to hear me on this. It moves where there's water. There's something that's quenched in the soul to come to Eretz Canaan, Eretz Yisrael, the land of the promise. I want to look, please, in early Genesis, chapter 2, and note how the place called Eden is noteworthy because of its water. And I want to develop that a little. We read in chapter 2, verse 10, V'nahar yotze me'eden, and a river went out me'eden, from Eden, lehashkot et Hagan, and it watered the garden. I mention this because where you have an abundance of water, there's life that grows up around it. And if you look at the temple itself in Jerusalem, Lawrence Steger, professor of archaeology, Harvard University, I heard him give a lecture on Jerusalem itself, the way it was mapped out in antiquity relative to Solomon's temple. And he observes, he lights upon the Gihon. It was a spring that emanates from underneath the city, and it would go out and water the garden. It would go down from there to, the Valley of Gehenna, as it's known today, the Kidron. It makes its way around. And his thesis was that the temple complex itself was set up topographically in order to mimic the watered garden that is Eden. I mention this within the context of observing that there's something within the heart, in the soul, that beckons people to come. There's even language in literature, taste and see that the Lord is good. It plays the living waters. There's an old song, come to the waters, stand by my side. You won't be denied. The language is just so rich in biblical text. Coming to Israel is coming to the garden. It's coming to a place in a religious sense where there is a fountain of living water. It didn't even exist. What am I referring to? The great world-class city behind me. It was nothing but sand. When Israel itself was under the hands of the Turkish Ottoman Empire, nothing developed there. I'm coming to you from the city of Jaffa. Yaffo, as it's known in Hebrew, has a long history going back to Bible days. Behind me was absolutely nothing, at least until the Jews got here. Tel Aviv, Jews raised money, purchased some land, and built a school here, a very unique school. The purpose of that school? To teach this newly minted language called modern Hebrew. It had fallen into disuse. Hebrew was the language of the synagogue and prayer, but a nation was born and a language to go with it. So much was born here. Speaking of the Hebrew language, I'd like to go back to the book Bereshit, Genesis, and unpack a verse in brief and give an application that resonates with me. We're told in 2:15, Vayikach, and he took, Adonai Elohim et Adam, that is, the Lord God took the man, Vayinichehu, and he put him Began Eden. He took him and placed him in Eden. And here's what I want to get to. La'avda, to work her, ul shamra, and to care for her. Conceptually here, God takes a man and he puts him in a place where he was destined to work. He was destined to throw his energies against that. Now, I've long said, as someone who's raised boys, if you can find a woman that you love and work that you love, I've told my sons that's 95% of life right there. And I think you'd say amen to that. It's good if a man can find something that suits him. I mention that because here there's a man that's brought to a place and he's ideally suited for it. This, by the way, is something of a prototype of something to come later. I mention that because Adam, as we know, is going to get kicked out of the garden. Later on, this fella Abram is going to be beckoned to return to it. And in the 15th chapter of the book Bereshit of Genesis, we're told, on that day, Adonai cut a covenant with Abraham. In Hebrew, karat berit. Karat comes from a word meaning to cut. We might think of making a deal. Oh, and today in colloquial English, people talk about cutting a deal. It really comes from a reading of the literature. God cut a deal. There was a sacrifice. That's another story. God cut a covenant with Abram saying, I give this land to your seed. It's not just that it's given to him, that it's given to his progeny. And it's not just given for the moment, it's given in perpetuity. Now, this is a nice day here in modern Israel, and the land is abuzz. People are taking time off. They work very hard to cultivate all of this, to bring the miracle of Israel out of the earth into the modern world. And there's activity, there's music, there's a kind of bustling atmosphere that brisks here. What's the point that I want to make to you from here? Interestingly, when you look at biblical literature, God puts a man and he puts him in a place, and there's a work that he's uniquely styled to accomplish. And this, by the way, is telling of the fact that as we develop the story further on, that God tells Abraham, Yitzchak, and Yaakov and his progeny, there's a land, there's a place where you're destined to, and destined to flower in that particular land. And that flowering is something that exists in perpetuity right into the modern era, as is amply attested by the fact that I'm coming to you now from the miracle that is Israel. Oh, a little better than 100 years ago, people started returning, and you know what? God was with them. You know, God mit us is the Germans. I've seen belt buckles of the Nazis that give voice to that. Well, not so. Various empires have risen held high their torch and risen, and they've been fallen in the course of history and circumstance. But Am Yisrael Chai, the people of Israel, live, an ample attestation that God watches over his word to perform it.
Our resource this week, the Grafted In package, which includes the series Called Together on 2 DVDs, a Grafted In necklace, 2 Stand With Israel koozies, a Grafted In decal, a Grafted In pin, Our Things to Come bookmark, and the Prophesied Messiah bookmark. Contact us and ask for the Grafted In package. And thank you for your support. Our founder, Zola Levitt, established this ministry in 1979. Today, we continue bringing you the good news of Messiah and the truth about Israel via television, our newsletter, and the internet. If you believe that this Bible teaching ministry is worthy of your assistance, then please call us at 1-800-WONDERS or visit us at levitt.com. We sincerely appreciate your prayers and your financial support.
Thank you so much for your consistent contributions to make Zola Levitt Presents go on the airwaves across the world and on social media, literally around the world. Thank you so much for making all of this possible. Now let's go back to the Holy Land to hear more from Jeff on location.
Umeitz hadat tov v'ra, but from the tree of the knowledge of good and evil, lo tokal mimenu, you must not eat. Ki for bayom ha'kalka, for in the day that you eat mimenu from him, mot tamut, you will surely die. And with that warning came that which became the nemesis of humanity, that is, they ate. Houston, we have a problem. And God had an answer. Of course, you know, the Genesis text there in Genesis 2 is where that story is told, and then eventually they're forced to get out of Eden, and off they go. They left God's presence in some sense, but they never left God's providence, because he had a plan, he had a will for it even so. The question is, how do we fix that which is broken? Well, I'll tell you how. We do it right here. I know it looks like rocks only, but this is sacred space. We're coming from the place where the Mishkan dwelt, what we refer to as the Tabernacle. You say, Jeffrey, this doesn't look like Jerusalem to me. You're right, but it dwelt here in Shiloh 369 years before it made the move up to the mountain. This was the headquarters of Israelite existence in what's referred to as the West Bank today. You know, it's hotly contested. People say, well, this is, Palestinian territory. The Jews have no history. Well, tell it to the people that built all this up, because we're right not just at the ruins of the place in general, but specifically we are where the holy place, and the holy place was right behind me when that tent first stood. It's a fascinating story. There's a problem in the Bible, but God didn't just leave it as a problem. He had a plan for a solution. And central to the plan was a place where women and men would bring sacrifice. Inasmuch as Adam and Cheva made a sacrifice to placate the divine, so too Israelites were beckoned to do much the same. We read in the book Exodus with Moshe Rabbeinu, with Moses, how they make their way into the wilderness and instructions are given. It starts in the 25th chapter of Exodus and works its way to the end of the book, where there's instructions given about the manufacture of the space that is going to long abide in this place. And after the particulars were given, in Exodus, there's something interesting that's noted that really harks back to Genesis itself, according to a number of biblical commentators. This sacred space was developed, the tabernacle, and then this is before God here, but the particulars of it with a courtyard and the Holy of Holies with the ark and the holy place with the candelabra / menorah, with the incense altar, with the table of showbread and all of that. The particulars were spelled out, it was manufactured, and after all of that which was created, we're told in chapter 40, verse 33b in Exodus, so Moses finished the work. It fascinates me that you have the creation of this sacred space. And it concludes then with, and it was all, Moses finished it, it was completed. I mention that because if you look at the creations in heaven and earth and the story of Adam and Cheva in early Genesis, we're told in chapter 2, Vayiklu Hashemayim v'retz v'kol tziva'am, God had made it, and then Vayikal Elohim bayom hashvi'i malachto asher asah, that he made it, he finished it on the seventh day, Vayishpat bayom hashvi'i mikol malachto asher asah, and he rested, he finished it. It's interesting, you have the creation and then there's a completion notation. Similarly, with the creation of sacred space, there's a completion notation. There are a number of these little connections here in the literature. I don't have time to develop all of them. But coming to you from this place, the sun is rising over me right now, and it comes from the east and heads this way. You might remember from Eden. The couple left and they went to the east, but now there's this return. They're returning back to the place called paradise. And those that make their way back come to a place that's defined as rest. God rested, Moses rested, and there's something about finding your way home to God, and yes, you, and I mean you, can find a rest that's been made available to you and for you by He who gives rest to weary souls and He who gives a sacrifice for the sins that burden them.
I would say one of the questions maybe in this series this week is, why do our souls long for peace and rest in our lives?
Yes, people are so unrested, aren't they?
Right.
Many.
Yes, and it really is a problem. And the Bible speaks of a rest, and there's a place where our soul can rest in Israel.
We sing about it every week out of the hymnal.
When peace like a river, oh, that's kind of good. That's like the river in Eden.
But do we practice it?
Right, we want that peace.
That's the question.
It's $1 million question,
Yeah.
and this is $1 million segment now, as our very own Chaim Mailspin is going to speak to Doron, who is an Israeli, a leader of a prayer ministry, a ministry of rest, coming to you from Jerusalem.
So there's a growing interest in nations to come to Jerusalem and to come to the Temple Mount. Why, in your opinion, is this?
Well, all the Temple Mount movements and organization is in Israel. Every one of them verbatim say the same thing. Bet Tefillah ikare Bet Tefillah lechol amim. It will be called a house of prayer for all nations.
Yes.
So we believe in that. I believe in that the nations are going to stream to Zion. They're going to stream to God's holy house. And that's going to be part of the restoration that God brings, not just to Israel, but to the world as a whole, because that's going to be the glue in which God is going to breathe life through Israel and through onwards to the nations.
Do you think that the rebuilding of the temple is a reconstruction of Eden that was lost?
Absolutely. The genesis of the Temple Mount starts with Adam and Eve. God takes a piece of earth, as we know, makes clay, breathes life into it, etc., etc. That's Adam, the first human being. He's created according to Jewish tradition from the very earth of the Temple Mount. Future then, you have also the Garden of Eden, which is the place he's dwelling in this heavenly place, as you will, Gan Eden, which is what we say. You're going to heaven. In Hebrew, you say Gan Eden, by the way. I know in Christian English speaking, you use a different term, heaven and Eden, right? But in Hebrew, you use the same term for both Eden and heaven. And so the point is, in Jewish tradition, we believe this is where Adam was created out of the earth. We believe this is where the Garden of Eden was. And we also believe this is where heaven will meet earth. So this is the very navel of the earth, the very place where heaven meets earth, literally.
For insightful perspectives on Israel and Bible prophecy, ask for our free monthly newsletter, The Levitt Letter. At levitt.com, you can read the newsletter, watch the TV program, or visit our online store. Stay current with us on social media via Facebook and Twitter. Come with us on a tour of Israel or Petra, or a cruise to Greece and Ephesus. Please contact us for more information.
We invite you to join us on a Zola Levitt tour. You can find all the information on levitt.com. We go to Greece, Israel, and Petra. And all of these places that we go, one of the things that Kirsten and I love is the fresh food markets. It's amazing, it's beautiful, it's fresh, and we will take you to some of those great markets. Right now, let's go to Sarah Lieberman as she teaches from one of those markets.
Shalom Chaverim, and welcome back to our series on the 7 species, Shiv'at HaMinim, about the fruit of the promise that God gave to the people of Israel as they entered into the land. Today, we're talking about the pomegranate. Now, the word for pomegranate in Hebrew is rimon, and it is one of the fruit that the spies brought back from spying out the land to symbolize the fruitfulness of this new wonderful place that God was bringing the people of Israel. In Israel, here today, we eat it in the feast of Rosh Hashanah. Because the pomegranate has so many seeds inside of it, it is a sign of abundance. And people eat it as a sign of abundance for the coming year. Now, the pomegranate was also featured in the Tabernacle and in the Temple of Solomon. It was featured on the pillars within the temple and worn on the edge of the priest's garments. There was a bell and then there was a pomegranate, as a sign of abundance and the fruitfulness of God. So this week, as you contemplate the fruit and blessing of the Lord, may your life resemble this pomegranate, full of abundance and seeds for the kingdom of God.
Sing a song of Israel, sing a song of love. Sing a song of Israel, joy and peace and love. For my family's home now, God has brought us home now. Sing a song of Israel. For this land is my land. Yes, God's land is my land. He promised my fathers that this land is mine. Sing a song of Israel, sing a song of love. Sing a song of Israel, joy and peace and love. For my family's home now, God has brought us home now. Sing a song of Israel. For my family's home. sing the song of Israel.
As you are watching our program today, there are people right now getting on an airplane heading to Tel Aviv, Israel. And what's that saying we've heard?
Well, it's a great saying that you just don't simply go to Israel, that
Right.
God calls you there,
Yes.
as he's been calling people for thousands of years from Abraham. He was the first one that God said, come to this land, right?
Yes, and he's all about beckoning people to his place. Unfortunately, when he calls, we don't all pick up the phone, or sometimes the line is busy because we're talking to other gods. That's something worth fixing, isn't it?
We're so
good.
thankful that our son
Got the call.
and
listened to it, and he picked
said
it up.
yes.
Yeah, he picked up the phone. That's the best answer when God calls us.
He said yes.
And thousands of people, thousands are making Aliyah. They're going up to Jerusalem and to Israel. And actually, our son Ryan, who works at the International Christian Embassy in Jerusalem, just this past week, they filmed 300 people from France making Aliyah.
Yes.
Unbelievable.
And all of that, to me, is a template in the natural, what happens in the spiritual. And our viewers can tap into that. They feel called to these panels behind us. And for those that can't come to Israel, we bring it to you.
That's the beauty of Zola Levitt Presents.
That's true.
And all of your support for this program makes it possible for people around the world to go to Israel and to Jerusalem by way of this program.
Our visitors' presence help us to present.
Yes.
I'll say, too, we feel like we're home when we're there. You've been 50 plus times.
Yes.
And it feels like home to you, too. I
It
know.
surely does.
Right.
Yes.
We have so much more coming up in the next weeks on our series, Return to Eden. Tell your friends, tell your neighbors, tell your family to watch this program. The insight that Dr. Jeffrey Seif will bring all of you is priceless. Thank you for joining us.
Finish this out.
Thank you. And as you go, Sha'alu Shalom Yerushalayim.
Pray for the peace of Jerusalem. Our monthly newsletter, The Levitt Letter, is free and full of insightful articles and news commentary from a messianic perspective. Visit levitt.com to find our newsletter, along with current and past programs, our television schedule, and much more.
Don't forget to order this week's resource by calling 1-800-WONDERS, or you can purchase it from our store at levitt.com.
Your donations to Zola Levitt Ministries help these organizations bless Israel.
Thanks again for joining us this week. Zola Levitt Ministries and this television program depend on tax-deductible donations from viewers like you.
This has been a paid program brought to you by Zola Levitt Ministries.